misinformation and pseudoscience. Pseudoscience, particularly because we are talking from Science Research Institute. So science is kind of our forte to talk about. And we also decided on talking about this problem, particularly because of the last 18 months during the pandemic. Most of us, I think, have fought really a lot with how to deal with overload of information. And when there is information, there is also misinformation. And I don't think that misinformation has suddenly come in, but because of various forms of media, which is really accessible now, the spread of this misinformation is amplified a great deal. And that is going to be the crux of our conversation today. And to help me, I'm Somdita Karak, and I lead science communication and outreach at CCMB. And with me, I have this superb panel of people. On my screen, I see Aniket first, so let me introduce Aniket. Aniket is here for multiple reasons. Aniket is an associate professor at Homi Bhabha Center for Science Education. Most of our attendees today, if I'm not mistaken, are young students. So that, of course, is one interest area. But at the same time, Aniket has been a very active science communicator, and he runs something spectacular, which is a WhatsApp group that brings scientists and media people together. And personally, I think that's an extremely important area where probably we can help spread the right information. We'll hear about that in better details from Aniket himself. Then I see Surabhi. Surabhi is my colleague at CCMB. She is the genomics research coordinator here. At the same time, because in the last 1.5 years, we have also been hearing about all these coronavirus variants, right? So Surabhi is the person behind who's leading a team that finds out these variants at CCMB. And because of her position in the genomics group at CCMB, she has also been an active member of the Indian scientists' response to COVID, where she has been talking of how to make sense of these variants, or how should we go about the vaccines. So we will also hear from Surabhi on that. Then I have Shantala on screen, and Shantala Haridas is the Associate Director of India Bioscience. India Bioscience is, if I have to define India Bioscience in my words, it builds community of life scientists in India. So in building this community, they build a lot of resources. And again, because we have so many young students among us, I think India Bioscience would be a great resource for them to also know about. And particularly in this session, if you're talking of information and misinformation, India Bioscience, can it play a role in becoming a source of reliable information? That's something I'm keen to know from you. And then, of course, I have Geeta Vani Rayasam, and she is the head of science communication and outreach at CSIR headquarters, Delhi. And CSIR is this humongous mammoth organization of 38 national laboratories in India. And that also means that Geeta is one of those people who has access to a lot of science that happens in a lot of these national laboratories. And she coordinates how this science and developments are communicated with public. And needless to say, during COVID, she has spearheaded a lot of efforts in communicating our understanding of COVID and coronavirus as time progressed. So I'll do little bit lesser talking right now, and let me start with Geeta now. Geeta, can you tell a bit about how you and CSIR goes about informing public about the work that we do? And I'm asking this question to all panelists with the lens of defining what is news or reliable information versus fake news. So if we can define what is reliable information, then I think if we can understand the attributes of reliable information, then we can also know what is then not reliable information, also known as fake news. Okay, Geeta.
Thank you, Somdata, for having me here today, and warm welcome to the other panelists and all the audience. Yeah, like Somdata said, CSIR is a huge, humongous organization, and there's wide areas like from aerospace to metals to biology. So there's a huge span of work which goes on, and being one of the early scientific organizations in the country, there's a lot of responsibility which CSIR has. And I must say that, what we're talking of science communication today, which has kind of become a buzzword in India, I think, in the sense that there's a lot of emphasis. If I talk about CSIR, I think CSIR is again like one of the pioneers in science communication, if I can say that, because we have this institute called of NISCARE, which has now become NISPER, which was solely dedicated to science communication. So it's not something new. So the need for communicating science, I think, has always been there. And yesterday I was reading, some article. It was always there that how do you communicate science is a very important aspect, right from publications, which is nothing but communicating your results, right? Or when you're talking to public, of course, it's not the audience is different. Each time the audience is different as to who is the information will depend on the audience. And of course, from peer to peer versus the common man, there's a huge difference in science communication. So coming to CSR, and mostly I have been in this role maybe roughly along with the COVID pandemic, if I can say, also a little over that. And so COVID pandemic really threw us into the flurry of activities because everybody wanted to know what's happening, and rightly so, because and as a scientific organization we had a huge responsibility to address these queries. And I think that's where the challenge was, because on one hand we were doing the research, and I think one of the greatest challenges which I personally found was we did not know much about the virus. We ourselves as scientific community were learning. Every day some new information was coming which could contradict what was known earlier. And then how do you communicate this to the common man, right? Who wants to know what's happening? Like how is it spreading? What do we do about it? I think perhaps never before there was such a challenge where in a dynamic situation you have to communicate the science. And I think that, and of course, then the issue of fake news, which is always a problem, and with this multiplication of social media and WhatsApp, that's a tremendous challenge. And I think as a responsible scientific organization, the onus is on the scientific community and the scientists and the media also who cover science to make sure that the science we convey is accurate. And I think that's a big challenge. And I think each of us should take responsibility for communicating, especially the scientific community. I think most often we think that, okay, once our research is done, my job is done. That is what pretty much, and rightly so, I think. But now I think the demands are much more, be it from the organizational perspective or policymakers. There's much more emphasis on communicating science to the public. And the pandemic has shown why it's important, right? Because earlier perhaps one could get away by not communicating it, but I think now there is no be it vaccine hesitancy or taking the precautions. I think there's a huge role, and at CSIR we have tried to do quite a bit of science communication during this time. And one of the things I think hallmarks what we also tried to do was doing it in regional languages. Again, most of us are comfortable doing it in English, and but I think there's a vast majority of population who needs to be reached out. I think our efforts are again just initial efforts, but I think this is something we need to pay attention, because I don't know whether you call it fake news, but sensational news travels faster in regional media. If you look at English news, fairly there is reasonable, and you can always go to BBC or trusted news magazines. But when you come to regional languages, I think there's a dearth of really genuine information, and I think institutional efforts in regional languages would also help in alleviating this problem of fake news, especially in the hinterland of India. And I think that is where, which is a huge unmet need. And I think that nowadays, at least I see there's a lot of emphasis on regional languages, which everybody's rightly doing. And I think we need a lot more. And one last point before I leave is the thing is, again, information, there's again an information deluge. What do you look at? And I think, again, my personal opinion is we are not able to penetrate, be it in WhatsApp or something. Okay, we do a lot of press releases, Twitters, but not everybody is on Twitter or Facebook. You need to penetrate with the WhatsApp community. And again, the challenge is there was an article in Science that there was a systematic study that fake news travels faster than the genuine news. So how do you deal with that? That is a challenge. And I think again, more and more, and maybe effective way of communicating is short bites and something which can easily be shared in low data settings, because huge files, even I find it difficult to receive big videos. So something which is small bites in WhatsApp or something very user-friendly language. These are some of the things I think one needs to pay attention to. Yeah.
So basically, if people have to know of the webinars and stuff or any other content that CSIR produces, then they could just follow CSIR social media handles, given that they're already on social media.
Right. Yeah, that's the easy way of, at least we are trying to be as active as one can. And so we try to maintain that on Facebook, YouTube, and we are recently into Instagram also, because most students are Instagram. I think so. We are still not very active on Instagram, but we hope to be. So I think if whoever has access to social media, that's the easiest way to know more about CSIR.
Thanks. Shantala, how do you go about it at India Bioscience?
Thanks, Somdata. So as you mentioned, India Bioscience is an organization that kind of works to build a community of researchers, life scientists in India. And so I completely agree with all the things that Geeta mentioned. But I think one other aspect that I think what India Bioscience does, and this is kind of like the long distance aim, is, we keep popularizing science. So we keep writing articles about, scientific developments in India. What is this? What is that? Because if you were to ask me, if I were to go and tell someone, like, oh, this is some really cool science that I'm doing in my lab, I think the kind of resistance to imbibing that will be lower versus if I go and tell them, oh, in the middle of a pandemic, you have to take a vaccine. I, as a scientist, am telling you this is the right thing to do. So I think that is something that, that is worth building in the long term, building a scientific temperament. So, continuously putting out pieces of science, showing that good science is happening in India, so getting people to think that way. And I think that is also helpful because as we were talking about fake news, of course, anybody who's reporting on science, it's their responsibility to, fact check, to put out pieces that are accurate, that are relevant. But in a world where that doesn't happen, I think it's very important for the public, the general public, to have a scientific temperament. So to be able to kind of question what is the news that's being put out, have the ability to look at it from more than one angle. And especially now in a pandemic where the implications are so strong, right? Because the implications of what the scientific information is telling you is so in your face. It's leading to casualties. People are feeling the impact in their personal lives. And so, it's also quite an emotional and sensitive time. So I think in that kind of a system, to be able to dissect out the information that you're receiving. So I think that is something we do. We put out articles continuously. And we try to talk to people right from undergraduate students onwards to senior scientists, policymakers. We try to bring everybody into the discussion because if I might say, one of the problems I think that the science communication in India is facing is that it tends to be a little unidirectional. It tends to be a little bit like scientific organizations or, even science communicators are putting the information out. But when when they encounter a resistance, it's important to have a bidirectional conversation. And just here, I want to mention, I was seeing some late night talk show and a climate scientist was talking, and that's another area, right, where a lot of resistance is felt. And so she was saying that we shouldn't categorize the population into us versus them, scientists versus non-believers. Because in actuality, you have scientists, you have a group of people who are non-believers, who no matter what you do, they'll say, no, you don't need to wear a mask, you don't need to take a vaccine. But in reality, they are not a majority. They are a small part of the population. You also have a part of the population who just doesn't bother educating themselves or, kind of getting an awareness of the scientific advancements, and you have another batch who's kind of doubtful. And so these are the group, the latter two groups are the groups we should really try to target. So, I think that is also, we shouldn't kind of make science communication combative, targeting a small percent who's unlikely to kind of, change their mind, no matter how much evidence you put, how much evidence you put there. So I think it's important for science communication to be a conversation. It really has to be bidirectional. And another thing that India Bioscience tries to do, because Now as science communication, the responsibility of researchers and scientists to communicate science is becoming so paramount. You have a lot of young researchers who do want to, and even researchers in general who do want to communicate their science, but they often find that they're inequipped because either during the course of your PhD or your postdocs, which are the traditional trainings that scientists undergo, rarely are you kind of like equipped with like how do you communicate your science. You spend so much time learning how to do science, how to communicate in a scientific kind of format, scientific jargon, that then even if the best intentions, if you say, I really want to explain what my lab is doing, I think it's really useful, you find yourself inequipped. So that is something India Bioscience is really trying to work, being an organization that kind of interacts with so many people, including science communicators. We're trying to see that, how can people better equip themselves and kind of train themselves to communicate science. So these are some of the efforts that we are undertaking.
Cool. And India Bioscience is special because it also has the capacity to bring in a variety of stakeholders.
Absolutely.
So you reach out to many different kinds of people at one time. So let me go to Surabhi from here. And I would probably want to hear from Surabhi on, given her experience with ISRC on communicating about COVID vaccine or variants, how do we effectively reach out to people that we need to reach out to?
Thanks, Mundata. Hello, everyone. Thanks for having me here. So I would actually begin this by picking up from where Shantala left off. I think that point that she brought out, because being a scientist, I resonated with that. If I want to communicate, I'm not trained to do it, right? So I think being in touch with science communicators is something that can help you do that. And one way is, there are two kinds of fake news, okay? You can have something that is intentionally false. Let's assume we can't do anything about that to counter it. It's just to create panic or havoc or whatever. But there's also misleading information where you're trying to put in something that makes sense to you, but you're not able to communicate in a way that the public can understand. And so it becomes misinformation, and it may amplify in transit and become something else entirely. So in fact, ISRC, the Indian Scientists' Response to COVID-19, was conceived because there was felt a need way back in March 2020 itself, that there should be an effective forum which can reach out to the Indian public and take scientific findings and funnel them through in a way that the public can understand. And one of the ways we did that was hoax busting or science communication itself, where now if you want to read up on vaccines, you have all these technical articles about the efficacy of vaccine against this variant and the neutralization assay, which anybody who even wants to find out will not be able to get it. So what we thought was, we distill this information out. We can put in some of the technical literature for people who are a little more technically oriented to read, but essentially distill it down and bring it to facts. And you don't want to put your opinion onto people, but you put it in the form of tables or charts or facts, which can kind of be easy to understand, and then people can make up their own mind. So that was basically the emphasis of ISRC, which I think now going ahead can become a focus for most scientific organizations. As Geeta said, now this has become a need of the hour. Earlier, you could get away by not communicating. And so in that sense, I think liaising with your own science communicators, having a channel of science communication, when you write a technical article, if it's important for the public, make a blog post about it. That's not so technical. And believe you me, that's not easy. That takes practice. And so we need trained people who can do that. So that could be one way in which you are not leaving a void where misinformation can spread, because you've already put the right information out there in a way that is accessible.
Cool. So this of course, the need to make information more accessible, and which is what probably ISRC has hugely focused on. But at the same time, the question still remains that, I mean, if we are just putting the facts out there, then we are basically working on the assumption that people already trust the scientists, and we are just making them, I mean, we're providing them information that is easy to understand. We're not still thinking that they might even not trust. But of course, there's data which also says that the trust issue is not the bigger issue, but it's the accessibility issue. So, but we'll also probably think of that a little bit more, and I'll want to know about how you perceive this in some time. Aniket, let me come to you, and I absolutely want to hear how you think media can be this effective tool of reaching out to masses. I mean, it is, of course, a very effective tool to reach out to masses, but how can it take information which is reliable and correct and accurate as much as possible? And how have you gone about doing this?
So, since most of your audience is younger students, let me try to keep it as simple as possible. Maybe the students in the audience may not realize, but the way we communicate science has transformed in the last 30 years. When 30 years back, when I was in school, that time, the sources of information used to be mainly newspapers and books. Doordarshan still had only one channel. Once in a week, there used to be one science show for half an hour. Compare that scenario to what we see now. Not just you have lot many resources available in form of printed material, but everybody has now, or at least the urban population or a significant percentage of Indian population has internet at their disposal, which means that everybody can go to internet and find out their own information. That has also transformed how media looks at the science news. What at some point the media won't accept this openly, but sometime within last 15 years, they made a conscious decision that when it comes to science related news, people can get that information on the internet anyway. Those who are interested in science, let them get it information on anyway. So let's not waste money to invest in good science journalists. So they stopped hiring science journalists. Nowadays, they still publish some scientific news, but that job is done by some journalists who don't have background in science. So now it is responsibility of scientists and science communicators to help these journalists to convey the correct information to public. I realize this more. This problem is lesser in English media, but in regional language media, as Geeta said earlier, this problem is bigger. There's usually one journalist who will handle everything from environment to education to science, and that person has to know each press release which comes from every place. Sometimes in biology, sometimes earth science, sometimes in astronomy. He or she has to understand what is important in this and what I should tell my readers. So I used to get these phone calls from many journalists at 8 in the night, 9 in the night. See, suddenly there is this press release and I had to publish something tomorrow. So can you explain what this means? So that gave me idea that there is this need, that there are sincere journalists. They are not intentionally trying to do a bad job. They're trying their best. So, but they still don't have the expertise with them. So there is a need for them to reach to right experts who can explain the news in simpler, that press release or whatever new discovery report which has come. If somebody can explain that to them in simple way, then they can also communicate that better with the public. So that is why I was also, like Surabhi, I was also involved in ISRC when ISRC pressure reduced a bit after last July, August. Then I thought that, okay, this may be a good time to bring together people, scientists who are interested in science communication and science journalists from different news organizations. So, and we started this WhatsApp group where the purpose is simply, if you want to understand some science story, you just ask, okay, this is the story I want to understand, or this is the discovery which I read about. I want to contact the person who was involved in discovery. Because can somebody help? And that kind of exchange of information happens. So that is how we started that group, and now it has 200 plus members, as you know.
Yeah. So tell me this, Aniket. Now that you have this huge experience of hand-holding journalists into writing better drafted science stories, as a reader, what are the things that I should look for in a story to to figure out if it is a well-researched story or not? Like basically a well-researched story, I'm also meaning as a more authentic, more correctly written story.
Okay. So usually a good story, so newspapers, we still can trust enough, because newspaper, the news cycle is still 24 hours. That is, if they publish something, they have to be liable to that. They have to stand with that news for at least 24 hours. The TV media, they just want to give away the news give out news first. They think that if we make a mistake, we can correct in 1 hour. So their news cycle is only 1 hour. So newspapers, generally, I would still say are more reliable. So let's focus on the news which you read on internet or forwards which you receive on social media. So typically, if you see some invocation of authority, NASA has said this, or BBC has said this, or somebody else has said this without proper reference, then it is a clear red flag that it is a fake news.
So if it says NASA says, then the report should also
it should
cite
also
a scientist from
NASA website.
Yeah.
It takes 30 additional seconds to just click on that link and check if that is actually going to a NASA site or some other news site, and it is just going in a loop. So if you do that basic check, that you can filter out more than half the fake news. Secondly, people should also understand that everybody around us has a tendency to just forward whatever interesting thing which they read without checking. So just don't assume that one of your teachers or one of your elder relatives have forwarded something to you. They may have checked it. There is no harm in doing independent check. If you realize that this news is fake, it is good if you tell the person that, okay, this was a fake news, please don't forward to others. But if it also helps if you just simply decide, okay, I got the fake news, I'm not going to forward it to anybody else. So that also stops the spread of fake news.
So there's personal responsibility on each one of us as well.
Yes.
Great. So I like having these bullet points. Then for each one of us, we also know that, okay, I've read this. So what are the things that I need to figure out? What kinds of filters should I use for any forwards that I get, and how much trust should I invest in it?
And typically, if not, if this first criteria fails, that there is no invocation to authority, but even then, what you can simply do is take the keywords from that forward and simply do a Google search. There are hoax busting websites. Nowadays there are Indian websites as well, but before the Alt News and Quint, they started hoax busting on their own. Even before that, there were websites like Hoaxslayer, Snopes. So most of the forwards, you would find them listed there, that this is a clearly hoax, and they would also explain why it is hoax. So when you tell somebody that this is a hoax news, you can also show the entire detailed analysis why it is a hoax.
Thank you. So I also see quite a few questions from our audience. So let me also ask those right away. So quite a few people want to know, are there some topics which are more prone to forming fake news? And I think that's a very interesting question, that some topics should one be more careful before commenting on or before trusting them. Whoever wants to go ahead with that.
One factor I would say is if that forward has some feel-good effect, then it is those kind of fake news are more popular.
Okay.
Feel-good effect can be of any type. Like if you say that there is astrological prediction that COVID is going to go away in 15 days. So that is a positive news many people are waiting for. So immediately we will start forwarding without checking. Or if you say that, okay, India had nuclear weapons 5,000 years back, it's a feel-good effect about our country. So people will start forwarding without checking. So that feel-good effect is a common factor in most fake news forwards.
So does the exact opposite not hold true, that the doomsday scenario fake news?
Doomsday scenario, yes. Exact opposite also holds true.
Yeah.
I think you're right. Anything that catches the emotion, whether on the
Yeah.
positive or the negative, these are emotional clickbaits.
Yeah. So yeah, I think it's important to also understand the motivation for fake news. Like, why are there these people who want to create fake news? And probably they have vested interests in creating fake news because either they want to get clickbaits on their website, or it pushes their agenda. It could be anything. But the truth is that very few things around us probably are absolutely white and black. Most things are gray. So if you ever see things which are extremes, then it's a good practice to probably go through the checklist that Aniket just said. Go and check if it is really, really true. And there are ways of doing that for you. So what persuasive strategies make fake news seem to be true? I mean, if we are thinking that it's anyway too good to be true, then why does it still feel true to us?
I think
Geeta, have you seen any of these incidents happening during the last 18 months?
Yeah, I think somebody in the panel referred to, right? They refer to NASA, or they refer to, like citing these so-called credible sources without actually them being true. Then we all tend to believe. And actually, I was a victim of this. Sometime back there was something about cancer and some news, and I forwarded it. And being a scientist, like even I got caught away with that. Then I realized it's fake news. So sometimes they match it so well, like with citing all kinds of paper. Sometimes they even give references, some weird references, which may have no relevance. And of course, there is the issue of false advertisements also, right? You can call them fake advertisement for products, where you give a reference of some new paper which talks about something which is not related to the actual benefits of that product at hand. So they are very clever, I would say. It's almost like a constant battle, and they're getting smart. But I think again, cross-referencing, when you feel that something is off, again, doing a thorough search. And an interesting feature I found, like recently in Twitter, is, when you are sharing an article, they ask, do you want to read this article before you forward it? They have this feature. So, for example, I know I've read this article and I want to forward somebody. I've read it in some other source, but maybe not on Twitter. So then Twitter pops up this question. So at least these kind of small measures, perhaps, will help in combating the fake news to some extent. But I think we have to be vigilant. That is, I think they are very smart, and maybe going to authentic sources like fact check site. And otherwise, I think it's almost like a constant battle, because to find out, there are no easy solutions, in my opinion, to find out what's. But I think thorough research. I think go look for sources, listen to authentic voices. If you have any doubt, or like say WHO, go to the actual website and see, instead of believing somebody else, or CDC, for example, or NIH, or in India, like ICMR, DBT. So try to get as authentic information as possible, especially if you're young students. I think you have to build in that culture of not believing everything is given. And I think that's kind of related to the scientific inquiry as well. Just because somebody is saying WHO has told that, go and check that. I think that should be, that kind of culture should come, that not believing blindly because somebody has told you so. So that way, even your fake news will not spread. Once you start questioning, is this news really the right thing? I think we need to bring in that culture. I think there's a cultural shift also required to question things when you're presented with some evidence.
Yeah.
So that also will, I think, combat the fake news to some extent.
Also, so one of the questions is how to get connected with scientists, and I would like Shantala to take it. And I would also like to add a little bit to that question. So continuing on what Geeta said, that it's nice to go back to WHO and see what the scientists are saying. But oftentimes, even on a singular topic, 2 or 3 different scientists can have diverse opinions. And that is so because we really do not understand the topic enough. So people can have all kinds of opinions. So it is important to to a variety of scientists, not to just one scientist. I at least strongly feel that. So how do you think a central body, India Bioscience in this case, can help people get connected with scientists? Is it only through reading the articles that you publish, or there are other ways of going about it?
That's a good question. So, I mean, of course, one way is through reading articles, but I think the other way is also, attending. And now, since everything is online, attending webinars, we have podcasts. So, there are various ways in which we are highlighting scientists. And this is something that I think students can do even to individual institutions, but India Bioscience is one place where since it's all kind of centralized, is we have a database of young scientists, and these are people who are kind of, they've put their names, they've put what they're working on, and so that is something you can always reach out. And so, as I was saying, you can do it in your local institute as well as in someone's in Hyderabad. They can just drop by CCMB, they can leave a note. And honestly, more often than not, I think scientists are, excited to talk to students, younger people about science. It might seem like there's a bit of, it might seem a little scary to approach a scientist. It might seem like the question you're asking is, maybe too simple, but I would like to, to all the students who are attending today, I'd like to absolutely tell them to kind of dispel that thought. If you have a question, reach out. I can honestly tell you that even scientists reach out to other scientists with questions which might seem quite elementary. And I think that is just the fundamental of science, right? Like kind of, having questions and seeking answers. So I think we have a database. You can always write to us because, we do interact with so many scientists that if you have something that you're interested in, you can kind of say, I'm interested in this, and if we know someone, we'll put you in touch. There is also something that is not run by India Bioscience, but is run by a scientist called Felix Bast, and that is called Mentex. And so periodically, he puts out a call for this, and so this is really open to everyone across the board. And so you can kind of sign up, say what you're interested in. Say if you're in 12th standard, you're interested in kind of learning a little bit about, say breast cancer. And then if there's a scientist who's working on this, who's also signed up to this Mentex, it matches. So I think there are a lot of avenues for you to reach out to scientists. If I can also add, I think more and more, both India Bioscience, our science academies are kind of putting out interesting kind of stories about scientists. So you have, say, Leelavati's daughters about, women scientists in India. So I think these are all the kind of interesting reads. So if you as students are interested in kind of knowing more about scientists, these are the avenues that are there.
So yeah, basically, if you have questions, try getting in touch with organizations in your vicinity. That might not always be possible. So then there are these central agencies like India Bioscience where you can again get in touch with, or Mentex, where you can get in touch with them. CSIR also has access to a lot of laboratories. So that is another place that you can try getting in touch with. And I will really suggest that try getting in touch with as many people as you can, and try getting as many diverse opinions and thoughts on any question that you have, because chances are that nobody really has one concrete answer to it. So it's basically our knowledge is also very small and scattered many a times, and we are just making the best guess most of the times. So do that. So I'll take this last question, and I'm quite, I think it's a lovely question and I don't have an answer to it. Do you think that any particular background of people are more fallible to fake news? That could be age, social, cultural, whatever. Aniket.
Yeah. I was just looking at that question. See, each of us have our own confirmation bias, and if a news matches with our own confirmation bias, we are likely to believe that, whether it is true or false. So I may not believe a story that India had aeroplanes 5,000 years back, but if I may be gullible to say some other kind of fake news. So people do get affected, and it is unfair to say that only one kind of cultural background people will be more gullible. It will, we have to always be alert for towards our own vulnerabilities, and then we have to be careful about those kind of news more. That is the way to counter this.
Cool. Anybody wants to add anything to this?
No, I think I agree with Aniket. There's no particular, but I think maybe education does matter in the sense that at least if you are educated and you know where to look for, so certain amount of basic information. Not to say that all educated people are not falling for fake news. I think that Aniket answered, like, we all have our inherent bias, and but I think again, as I said, education does play an important role, and access to places for searching. If you don't have access to internet, where are you going to search and what are you going to look for, right? Whether the fake news. So certain amount of the people who are in a disadvantaged position, because they have no other alternative, not because they are not capable of understanding, it's just because they don't have resources. So I think earlier at least there used to be libraries. That's why I think, all those rural libraries or mobile libraries. So I think we need to shift focus also, even when we are talking of communication as communicators, not just institutionalized where people come to us, but I think us going into different areas. So to target the people and give them resources to find alternate sources of information. I think that would at least value add.
I just
Sure, go ahead, Aniket.
Yeah, I just remembered from what Gita was saying. So this is example which I sometimes give. See, the people who create the fake news or people who say creates this false information, they also tailor the message as per their audience.
Yeah.
So if you look at some Baba in some small village, he will just say that, okay, the God is angry with you. You give me some money. You give me some one chicken or something like that, or one goat, and God will be happy with you. End of story. But when some sophisticated Baba wants to mainly fool the educated crowd, then they will put some scientific looking words in their preaching, and then between the scientific, if you try to connect those, each of those words may be science, but the sentence is not science. So that is the strategy they would use. So depending on the cultural background of their audience, they will also keep tailoring their message.
So if I can follow up what Aniket is saying, somehow I feel it's like, the bacteria or the viruses we are fighting, the fake news is like that, right? So if we can use their strategy, we would have been effective communicators, I think. Use their strategy of tailoring the message to the audience. Unfortunately, many times, I think when we communicate, this is generally true of scientists, you make a PPT and use the same presentation everywhere. It could be industry, it could be peers, it could be social. But I think, so there is a lesson for us from this so-called fake news, how to tailor your message to the audience, to the kind of audience you want. So we can learn from them, and then maybe we will be effective so-called positive news or, true news communicators.
Also,
I could make a point here, Samdata.
Yeah, sure.
Just to add to what Geeta was saying, essentially, we don't see scientists so much on social media platforms, right? So there is an absence of the proper channels anyway. And they are also scientists who are generally journalist shy. So they are not into newspapers either, or they're not in the social media. So the guys who are actually there and putting out what Aniket so rightly said, science words, but not the scientific fact, are probably not the scientists at all. So if we as a community are more on these channels, we would also know what is going on and be able to combat it.
Yeah. So sometimes I also feel that we hear people who are around us, and whatever they are saying starts building up on our minds. So if there are scientists around us, then we will probably get access to how they think about science. And if I don't have access to that, then I hear whatever is there around me. It could be Baba, it could be my friends, it could be whatever my social circle is. So of course there is, just to conclude all that we have been discussing so far, there's an undeniable need for scientists and people to converse with each other in whatever platform we might make possible that, make that possible. In addition to that, each one of us have our own personal responsibilities of being skeptical about any piece of news that we see, particularly the ones that make us too happy or too sad, because often nothing is drastic, so drastic. And take as many opinions as you can. And bodies like WHO, CDC, India Bioscience, each of these are collectives, which means it's not just one person or not just one scientist. It's a body of people who are agreeing upon something. So try to get information from such bodies. And like Aniket said, each one of us have our own biases. All of us will trust some of the things more easily and not trust some of the things as easily. So the things that we tend to trust more easily, take a little more time and think through it and check these things, because we all might be passing on some kind of fake news because of our own biases. So with that, I will close this session, but I want Surabhi to answer one thing. There have been a lot of questions around COVID vaccine, and people want to know, is COVID vaccine safe to take? Should they take it? Should pregnant women take it? Should students take it? So we'll just end with Surabhi's messaging on COVID vaccine.
Okay, I think that's a little bit out of place for here, but since this is a very relevant topic, although I must say I'm not a qualified medical personnel and I cannot vouch. It is always best if you discuss with your doctor, especially for pregnancy and so on. But what we did put out, for example, through the ISRC was some of these questions, right? The vaccines are safe. That is why they are out there. We need to trust in our scientific and government municipal bodies that are putting out these vaccines. And at a population level, these are very important to stop the spread and not allow more variants to emerge, right? Because the virus only replicates in us, in human hosts. The more we allow the spread, the more is the chance that some other variant will come, which can maybe even evade vaccines. So vaccines are definitely our first line of defense. We have been lucky that we have so many vaccines coming up. They started within a year of a pandemic. It's unprecedented. So let us capitalize on that luck. And I think we should definitely go ahead and take vaccines. If you feel there are any health reasons that might forbid you from taking these vaccines, please confirm with doctors, confirm with a couple of doctors, get opinions, and then go ahead for your vaccination shot.
Thank you so very much, all of you, for patiently engaging in this discussion. And given that we are ending with COVID, that's also a good context for our sessions tomorrow, which begin at 10:30. Tomorrow, we are going to be discussing diseases. The first part of the day is really diseases. So do join us at 10:30 and see you all. And thank you all very much.
Thank you, Samvita. Bye, everyone.